Glenn Kaiser here. So, spiritual growth tools for musicians. You know, now we're going to move into areas of production. The last segments have been a little bit more personal. They get into recording, but maybe more live or, just personal as a musician doing stuff. Why are producers even involved? What does that mean? Well, I'm not going to go into all and elaborate on all. I want to keep this short and brief. The reasoning behind why certain people take the title of producer or co-producer, and it largely has to do, of course, with recording and putting out more of a pro level record production. Production and producers, many different forms. Some work together with a solo artist or a trio or a band, regardless of the style, and usually in the recording studio, as I say, sometimes video studio, whatever. And what they're doing, mostly, regardless of how you slice the bread and all the other, a lot of details and nuances I'm not going to get into, it's not you having to listen to or watch what's being done. So, for example, if I had a really good producer right now and really good gear, and we weren't doing the social distancing, I might not use the phone. It might matter. To some people, it won't matter at all. But, for example, the lighting. I already know that a good producer would bring in a couple of other lights, would position them in such a way that you don't get this dark light thing happening. Yeah, see? I mean, the background and everything. A good producer would go, let's set things up differently. What about your background? So on. Shine on your face. A good producer in a video would go, do we want the light glaring from his glasses? How can we, if he has to wear them, how can we set things up in such a way and light in such a way? So Juan Carlos, I've got a dear friend and works at GKmusoSeries005, Records, the incredible band called Exegesis. The guy's a gem. He's an expert. He knows what he's doing. He's incredible with video production. Ed Bylock, who I talked about, and I can brag on him all day long, engineer. He's a director of GKmusoSeries005 Records. He's a drummer in Glenn Kaiser Band, a three-piece blues rock group. He understands record production. Tom Cameron, for years, incredible brother, amazing, in my view, record producer, produced Rez albums, one after the other, all of my early, except for the recent years, when Ed's produced my solo projects. Tom, Ed, everybody that's ever been involved in production, and when I've been involved a little bit in co-producing and so forth, or working with, say, Daniel Band some years ago, co-producing up in Canada, a record. The producer is not you. Hopefully they're a listener and a watcher if they're in the video production, not just a fan. Not just your mama or daddy who thinks you're wonderful and you can't do any wrong and everything you do is wonderful. They should not be, hopefully, a hypercritic. Hopefully they're not such a perfectionist that they sterilize your sound, your song, the delivery of what you bring, that hopefully would come with passion and conviction and sounds like when you sing, when you play, in your writing of songs, in your arranging of songs, in your recording, that it sounds honest, that it sounds real. Maybe even leaves a glitch or two. When Rez Band was doing the Lament album, one of our last studio projects, Ty Tabor, the guitarist of King's X, a long story, we invited him to come up and produce that album, produce the band. And very long story short, the guy was a gem and a genius. He brought to the table things we would have never considered had he not been there. I don't think other producers would have necessarily thought exactly as he thought or give the input he gave. I thought that album was one of the best things Rez Band ever did for a lot of reasons. A lot of it had to do with Ty's production. One point. There was a song that I kept thinking maybe I should add a mandolin to. Now, we used a dulcimer, we used a lot of different instruments, different production effects, and so on in the recording, and they're still there. He did not agree with using a mandolin on that particular song. It was the one time in the entire process of doing that album together that we were just at heads with each other, loggerheads, disagreement. Finally, he looked at me very kindly, very, very calmly, and said, "Am I producing or are you?" And I looked at him and I thought, this is about trusting him in his judgment right now, right here. Not even taking the time for me to break out a mandolin and play it and try it. I deferred to him. I said, "You're the producer." And I stepped back and let it go. He was right. Why do I believe that? Because I listened to that song plenty within the next few weeks and months and after the album was out. He was right. I didn't see it or hear it in my mind at the time. Tom Cameron, If I Leave This World Tomorrow, originally recorded on my Spontaneous Combustion album, one of my early solo blues projects. That was a scratch track. I was sitting in another room just blowing. I wasn't paying I didn't care about the tone, none of it. I was just jockeying around the neck while the drummer and the bass player, incredible gifted studio musicians in Chicago, were playing. And it was like, okay, there it is. It's wonderful. You know what? Tom would not let me change, and he was right. Production is huge. Now, who produces your spirituality? Who helps to bring a production element? Who is outside of you and me, who can look into your life, who you voluntarily ask to work with you, who you work together with? Maybe a friend, but better than a friend. Somebody who has the courage and who you voluntarily will be willing to be accountable to and deeply consider, if not simply, okay, I'm going to trust your judgment on this one because I'm not hearing stuff that I find is unscriptural. I don't know if it entirely fits me, but it sounds like maybe it would. Maybe this is an area I need to grow in this thing. Spiritual direction. Spiritual directors will often give you a wisdom that you would never, it's just a concept that you would have never thought about. A producer is outside of you, outside of yourself. They try to look at the big picture, the details. They exegete like you interpret scripture. They see they try to look at the book, the chapters, the chapter, the verses around the verse, and then the key verse and the key words. And they keep changing perspective in their thinking. How does this element work with this other element? How does this guitar work with this bass? How does that bass and guitar work with those drums? How does that drum track? So sometimes producers will actually, in a studio, will actually say, I don't know if you need an accordion on that song. Or they may say, man, have you considered throwing an accordion or maybe a little squeeze box or a tin whistle on this? Whatever. Have you thought about maybe throwing together 2-3 tracks of the same exact rhythm guitar part to give it the punch and the guts? And you pan them hard left, hard right, and one right up the middle when you finally mix the song down. Some of that is engineering, but a lot of what I just talked about is what a producer might bring to the table, because they're thinking about how all the elements work together. That's also true in a spiritual sense. We need people to speak into our lives, and we need to find people that aren't just going to go, we love everything you do, cool, or I'm just going to sit here and watch. Man, that could have been better. I don't know if they're open. I don't want to say it. I've been in that position plenty of times where I thought, man, this would really be a blessing and a help to you in your spiritual life or even in your song recording or your performance. Are they open? If they're not, what's the point? You know what I mean? So there's judgment calls being made all the time by producers as well as by godly leaders, spiritual people, pastors, people that are mentoring you. We all need producers. Something to think about. If you're a musician, you're a Christian, you want to really grow, spiritual growth tools, practical growth tools, musical growth tools in recording and beyond. So we'll continue on in this series, and Glenn Kaiser here saying thanks so much for your time and for listening.